All right, welcome in. It's great to have you here. I am running on much less energy today. Uh, after a long night last night, Mike Guido here with you. It is great to be here with you. Um, we have plenty of stuff to go over today. Um, and so here's the goal for today. I'm a little bit more raggedy. I'm not wearing a nice shirt. I'm not you know, a lot of things going wrong with me today. Um, I'm going to hand out some grades from the draft last night. I know I'm a little late on this, um, but I'll put it here in the comments section. My man Parnell, who joined the show for a little bit last night, said the Rockets did well with the draft, and the Magic did as well. Yes, they did. Um, So we'll go through that. I'm going to go by division. So it's not going to be, which teams did the best, which teams did this. So I have this kind of, this sort of unorganized, but we're going to run through this. I'm sure you've seen a bunch of articles already from other sources of how everybody's team did. But after the 5 hour long draft show yesterday, I do think that it warrants a draft grade show just to kind of tie a bow around this whole thing. So let's start here. The Atlanta Hawks for me. So let's and just because they were the first team that popped into my head, the Atlanta Hawks right now, I'm gonna give them a B plus. So the Atlanta Hawks right now getting a B plus for me. They ended up coming away last night with 3 draft picks. Kobe Buffkin at number 15, the Michigan guard, Mohamed Gay at 39, and then Seth Lundy out of Penn State at 46. So they ended up with my 20, 50, and 47 player in that order. Like I said, I'm going to give them a B plus. I think I was not as high on Kobe Buffkin as maybe some others were. He's an incredible finisher and had a great end of the year last year at Michigan, and it really, you know, had his stock flying through the roof. I had mocked them Jalen Hood-Schifino for a long time. He ended up going to the Lakers, but I think this is a decent fit because it gives him a little bit more wing depth behind DeJounte Murray and Trae Young. I don't know I don't know about Kobe Buffkin's upside as a primary ball handler. I think he's going to be primarily an off-ball guy, so it doesn't really take any pressure off of their 2 lead guards, which I think they probably should have entertained at some point. Um, so Kobe Buffkin, not a bad pick, like I said, and he was flying up boards. I mean, he was number 20 on my board. He reminded me a lot of Jordan Poole. So maybe there's some sort of upside there as a primary ball handler. But I give them a B plus. Mohamed Gay, high upside player. He's got a wide offensive game. Again, he was my number 50 guy. I'm not sure how early he's going to contribute. He might be a project a couple years down the line. And then Seth Lundy, I mean, he's a guy that I think is going to play next year. Super ready, good outside shooter. He's got a good scoring skill set. He could find himself in the rotation very, very quickly. So I'll give the Atlanta Hawks B plus. 3 draft picks. I think they did relatively well. Again, 20, 50, 47 with Buffkin, Gay, and Seth Lundy for the Atlanta Hawks. All right. So since we're staying in the South Division, let's go the Southeast Division. Let's go to the Charlotte Hornets, who ended up having the number 2 pick in the draft. And they ended up, you know, having obviously Brandon Miller, but the Charlotte Hornets, again, same grade as the Atlanta Hawks here. I'm going to give the Charlotte Hornets also a B plus. So what they ended up doing, and they actually got a lot of good value. Brandon Miller at number 2. They took Nick Smith Jr. out of Arkansas at 27. And then in the second round, they took James Naji at 31, the Nigerian center, and then they took Amari Bailey, the raw guard out of UCLA, at 41. So they ended up with my 2, 19, 37, and 34 overall overall players. 4 draft picks. Overall, like I said, a good night. Um, Miller, I think, was the right pick. Obviously, he's the focal point of this draft class. I think, like I said, I said it a lot last night. I said it a lot 2 nights ago. Brandon Miller, I think, is the more natural fit with LaMelo Ball. I mean, I just as an off-ball wing, they needed front court help, right? Miles Bridges, PJ Washington, they're both leaving in free agency. So they could bring him back, but even with that, they still need the front court depth. And Brandon Miller has star upside for me. He's a spitting image of Paul George. I know a lot of people were making fun of him because he said Paul George is his goat and everything like that. Hey, listen, whatever. But Brandon Miller's a great fit next to LaMelo Ball. He's going to score a bunch, 6'9", gives you some two-way ability. Just one of the better shot makers in the entire draft. I think he's got a ton of upside as a prospect. And then Nick Smith, who's another guy, I think, with a ton of upside. Again, they got great value there. He's my number 19 player. I think he's a future 6-man of the year candidate. Like, he's going to be one of these guys that just gives you a spark off the bench. Reminds me a lot of Jamal Crawford. And I think he's more of a combo guard. I think there are situations where you can play him as a lead guard and then play him off the ball. He had a bad year at Arkansas last year, and I understand that. And a lot of, what his skill set shows didn't really equal results. I understand all that. But I really believe in him as a shooter. I think he's going to be a really nice shooter. He can really run the floor. He's got great speed. So, I think Nick Smith is going to be a really solid player for them given the opportunity. And they're really now stocking up on those off-ball guards. Nick Smith, James Bouknight, guys like that. I mean, they have a nice, set of off-ball guards that can go with LaMelo Ball as long as they keep developing them. And then Brandon Miller, obviously. I'm going to touch on Amari Bailey first because Amari Bailey is another one of these high upside guards that I think should do well for them. Again, Avery Bradley was my comparison for him. He gives them a lot of two-way upside, but I think he's a couple years down the line. I don't think Amari Bailey is going to find serious minutes right out of the gate. That's a kid they're going to have to gamble on and see if they can, by the end of his contract, see if he's worth keeping. But I liked that pick. They got him at 41. He's my number 34 player, just a high upside kid. I mean, he's not ready. He's not ready. He's a raw player, and he needs some seasoning. So, we'll see where they go with that. The pick that confused me, and I said it last night, was James Naji at 31. Not a bad player, 37, and I expected him to go either late first, early second. That didn't surprise me. James Naji is a pure rim running center, and I'm very interested into why they made a choice at that position, because I think that's maybe their strongest position at this point with Mark Williams, Kai Jones, and Nick Richards. I just don't see any room for James Naji to play unless unless they want to move some of those bigs and they want to just entertain having Naji start playing. Like I said, he reminds me of Jalen Duren. He's a very athletic kid. Gives you some offense directly underneath the basket, but he's primarily a defense and rim running kind of player. So like I said, B+ for the Hornets. Little confused by the James Naji pick early in the second round. But listen, the other three I really, really like. Brandon Miller, Nick Smith, Amari Bailey, I think gives them a lot of upside on the wing. So a good job overall by the Charlotte Hornets. Okay, now we get into my first B- of the day. And this isn't to say that they did bad, but I don't think that their value was super capitalized. That is going to be the Orlando Magic. Now, Orlando has done really well in previous drafts, right? Paolo Banchero, when they took Jalen Suggs and Franz Wagner the year prior to that. They've done really well in drafts recently. This year, they ended up taking Anthony Black at 6, and they took Jet Howard at 11. So those are my number 12 and 23 players on my board. And it might be a little unfair to give them a B minus just because according to my board, um, it's a little rough. But Anthony Black was my number 12 overall player. I was a little lower on him than most. I mocked him to the Magic. I think he fits what their tendencies say. Were they, and we talked about it a lot last night, they really favor skill set over athleticism. And that's exactly what their draft showed. Anthony Black and Jet Howard are not big time athletes. They're not. They're smart basketball players that are situational. And especially with Anthony Black, I mean, he plays a very, winning style of basketball when it comes to, his ability to pass and defend, get to the rim, all of that stuff. Like I said, he's not incredibly athletic. He's not incredibly fast, but he does a lot of the little things right. And he really became the leader of that Arkansas team. And Arkansas was loaded last year. They ended up three guys from Arkansas got drafted last night, and I thought there was going to be four with Nick Smith, Anthony Black, Jordan Walsh, who ended up going to Boston, and then Ricky Council. Ricky Council ended up signing a UDFA contract with the Philadelphia 76ers. But um, that was an Arkansas team that was loaded, and Anthony Black was really the leader of that team. So, but I love his defense. I think he's a lead guard. He's got great size for a lead guard, good defender, can really pass. I mean, there's a lot of upside with him when it comes to that. So, as far as that is concerned, um, I give the Magic a B minus. Like I said, I think they could have gotten more value. Jet Howard, and again, Anthony Black at 6 is the pick that doesn't really bother me as much. Jet Howard, I think, was a reach at 11. And it wasn't too bad, but given the guys that were on the board, I mean, with Grady Dick and Cam Whitmore and guys like Keontae George and Jordan Hawkins and guys like that, I think that were overall just better players in this draft that accomplished similar things. I think they could have gone in one of those directions, and it would have warranted them a higher grade. But listen, Anthony Black and Jet Howard's a solid draft. It accomplishes what everybody thought they were going to accomplish. They wanted to get some help in the backcourt. They needed some shooting. That's what Jet Howard does. Jet Howard is a big time shooter. And he was the man at Michigan, like I said, before Kobe Buffkin went off on his big, you know, climb at Michigan last year. Anthony Black, I'm sorry, not Anthony, Jet Howard was their guy. So they got a real scorer and shooter in Jet Howard, and then a nice, kind of do everything primary guard in Anthony Black. If Anthony Black can learn how to shoot, he's going to be really, really dangerous. Um, so a B minus overall for the Orlando Magic. Um, so let's go to the Miami Heat because Miami is. I was a big fan of what they did, and they didn't do much. But Miami is earning my first A minus of the day. One pick, first round, number 18. They took Jaime Jaquez out of UCLA. He was the number 28 player on my board, but as far as fit is concerned, it is just so good. It's so good. Jaime Jaquez, listen, I compared him to Kevin McHale. I'm not sure he's going to have the same Hall of Fame career that Kevin McHale did, but as far as cleanliness and his footwork and, just knowledge of the game and his defensive ability and his awareness and all of that stuff, I mean, Jaime Jaquez, he's one of the more decorated players in college basketball. He was one of the guys in college. I brought it up last night. One of the guys in college basketball, and there's very few, one of the guys that can just truly take over a game. And he did. He did it often. So good pick there by the Miami Heat. Like I said, he's one of the better defensive players in the draft. He's such a versatile defensive player. Has great footwork underneath. I think he's going to provide a lot of qualities that Miami can use right away. He's a polished player. Um, The issue with Jaime Jaquez going in was that you wanted him to be a little bit more of an efficient outside shooter. But listen, this is a guy that, it has a great work ethic. He's very clearly a team guy. He's a coachable kid. I don't think that Miami's going to have any trouble getting him to work on his perimeter game. So Jaime Jaquez to the Miami Heat, I think, deserves an A minus. It's a really, really good pick uh, by Miami. So now we head to the Washington Wizards, because Washington is one of those teams where they really made one of the first shocking moves of the draft. But to their own chagrin, it didn't warrant them a great grade. I'm going to give the Washington Wizards a C plus. Um, they ended up taking Bilal Coulibaly at number 7. After the trade with Indiana, they were at 8. They moved up one spot to number 7 to take Bilal Coulibaly, who is Victor Wembanyama's teammate. And he was another guy, again, that was just flying up boards. Excuse me. And then they ended up taking Tristan Vukcevic in the second round at number 42. So they ended up with my number 21 and number 41 players on my board. Coulibaly at 21, Vukcevic at 41. Vukcevic was one of the better international players, if not the best international player in the draft. I was a big fan of Ryan Rupert and guys like James Nagy, but Tristan Vukcevic definitely had an argument for being among the top international players in the entire draft. But and Bilal Coulibaly, an international player in his own right. I mean, listen, he's just one of these very interesting wing players that kind of plays like a guard, right? He's a great finisher at the rim. He gives you some shooting upside, good passer, good defender. He's just one of these do everything guys. And that's the thing. I know that, there were people that really kind of, you know, loved what he did as a player, despite the fact that he had a pretty underwhelming stat line last year in Europe. But truth be told, I mean, obviously Wemby speaks the world of this kid. And if you just asked around the league and you just looked at what teams liked, right? And they just said, listen, we can't really find that much of a flaw with him. He just gives you a little bit of everything. So, um, like I said, not great value for me. This is not a kid I would have traded up to go get. And it's very possible that he was going to end up being a lottery pick anyway. And if they didn't take him and they liked him that much, they needed to get him right here. But again, just not the direction I would have gone in. Um, Tristan Vukcevic, not a bad player. Like I said, he was my number 41 player overall. It reminded me a lot of Mo Wagner. Listen, great size. They needed a big in the worst way. Vukcevic is not a traditional big. He's more of a stretch big. Um, so we'll see if they can make something out of him. So again, not terrible, but not an exciting draft, I think, for the Washington Wizards. They took a lot of gambles. So, with their 2 picks, both of them are kind of gambles, and they both kind of, I mean, Vukcevic is not terrible value, but I think that, they could have gone in a safer, more direct uh, direction, a more conventional direction, and it probably would have earned them a higher grade. Okay. This is where I get excited because if you watch the draft show, if you stuck with us late last night, you could see how I freaked out when my own Cleveland Cavaliers ended up taking Imani Bates. That earns them an A. And I understand that I'm the crazy one. I'm not denying that. Okay. I don't think the rest of the industry's crazy. I think I am. So, you know, if you want to call me an idiot for having Imani Bates rated as high as I did, you absolutely can. And it's 100% warranted. And it is a hill that I am willing to die on. And I don't care. I don't care. So, Imani Bates was my number 6 overall player. I understand that that's nuts. But, you know, the Cavs took him at number 49 in the second round. And not only do I think that late it's a great gamble, but I also think it, has a chance to not only fill their need, but give them a legit option at that spot. And what I mean by legit option, I almost mean star potential at that spot, right? I mean, if you watched Imani Bates play, and I understand all of the negativity that comes along with his name now. I do. I get his body language stinks. I get that he had the off-court issue. I understand that, he was overhyped in high school. He went to Memphis and, didn't play well and then transferred to Eastern Michigan, and Eastern Michigan stunk when he was there and all that stuff. I get it. All right. I get all of that stuff. But he's a 19-year-old kid. He's thin as a rail. And if you watch the tape, you'd be lying to yourself if you said the kid couldn't play. The kid can absolutely play. Is there a little bit to be desired on the defensive end? Yes, there is. Is there a little bit to be desired from a playmaking standpoint? Does he need to improve as a passer? Does the ball need to not stick to his hands a little bit? Yes, that is all true. However, I don't think that we can write the kid off as, listen, I don't know what everybody was talking about as a high school kid. I mean, he's just not, he's not what everybody thought he was. No, I think he's everything everybody thought he was. But we've come up with reasons to not like him. I watched him as a prospect. I didn't follow him his whole career. Okay, I didn't watch him play that much in Memphis. I didn't, but I did watch him a lot at Eastern Michigan, and I saw the games where he absolutely torched Toledo, and he played against Michigan, and I watched a lot of those games, and the kid is just a shot making, shot creating wizard. He's just really good. So, especially at that value, 49. What did the Cavs need more than anything else? The Cavs needed shooters. They needed wing shooters. When they got torched by the Knicks in the playoffs, when Donovan Mitchell's shots weren't falling, there was nobody else on the team that could pick them up, right? It was, if Mitchell and Garland couldn't hit shots and couldn't create their own, there was nobody else on the team that can do it. Evan Mobley's perimeter shot is not developing the way as fast as people thought it would. And as much as people like Isaac Okoro's development as a corner three-point shooter, still incredibly spotty, right? Chetty Osman, Dean Wade, both kind of inconsistent. You needed guys that can shoot and guys that can create their own shot and just hit difficult shots off the dribble. And that's what Imani Bates does. So great value for me for the Cleveland Cavaliers, getting Imani Bates at 49. And I understand it's a risk, but I was super high on the kid, and I think it's a great pick by Cleveland that late. All right, let's go to the Indiana Pacers. Indiana is now looking at A minus grade for me. They did well. The Indiana Pacers did very, very, very well. Jarris Walker at number 8, Ben Shepherd at 26. They took the G League scorer Mojave King at number 47, and then Isaiah Wong at 55. So they ended up taking my number 7, 43, 60, and 53 player. So most of their picks were a little reachy. Jarris Walker is very clearly their top pick. This is and it's obviously, it's pretty obvious, right? Jarris Walker is the guy that will make this class good, because I have all the faith in the world that Jarris Walker will figure it out in the NBA. When I always say this, when I worked for Gallery Sports, one of my massive responsibilities was to watch and cover a lot of Houston Cougar basketball. I watched Jarris Walker virtually every game he played. And I had a criticism of Jarris Walker. My criticism of him was similar to that of what Paolo Banchero had the year prior. Jarris Walker very often was the most talented player on the floor at any given moment, and he didn't always look like it. That's true. That was my criticism. Jarris Walker was an inconsistent shooter at times. Jarris Walker lacked some effort at times. But in the times where he was really, really good, he blew everybody out of the water. He's a good athlete. He plays aggressively. Listen, he's a ready to play kind of player right now. Versatility on defense. He can play inside and out as an offensive player. He's got great size, great length, and he's a great kid. He's a great kid, super super coachable. And Indiana filled a need. They didn't go with a wing player, Cam Whitmore, one of these guys, Grady Dick. They didn't go with a wing player early on. I kept saying it the past 2 days. The worst kept secret in the NBA was that the Indiana Pacers needed a four-man. They needed a power forward in the absolute worst way. And what did they do? They got one. I had them mock Taylor Hendricks just because Jarris Walker in my mock draft was already gone by their pick. But Jarris Walker was my number 7 player. Reminds me a lot of John Collins. I think he could develop in a similar way, the way John Collins has developed. And now you're looking at a front court with Miles Turner, Jarris Walker, and Benedict Mathurin with good athletes that do a lot of things for you. So that's a win right there for Indiana. Ben Shepherd's a big-time scorer. He's a big shooter. Again, he was my number 43 player. So him getting taken in the first round, I think, was a little bit of a reach for me, but he's got real scoring potential. Quentin Grimes was my comparison for him. He's going to be an immediate wing shooter. Mojave King's a gamble. Not a great year with the G League Ignite. Another one of these wing scorers. You hope he pans out. And then Isaiah Wong at 55. He was my number 53 player. Listen, he's undersized for an off-ball guard. I think he's primarily an off-ball guard. He put on an absolute show in the tournament. Him and Nigel Pack for Miami. I mean, it was quite a thing to watch, and he's got some dog in him. So I think he's got some lasting potential. But we'll see. We'll see with that. They didn't do terribly. Like I said, A-. I think they did well as far as filling their needs and adding some potential real solid wing scorers. Like I said, this was a very deep wing draft. So if you were able to tap into this thing late, fill a need early, and tap into the wings late, I think that was a good job by Indiana by what they did. All right, let's go to the Detroit Pistons. So Detroit is now, I'm going to give them, what did I give them? I gave them a B plus. So let me just get this up here so that we know what we're talking about. So the Detroit Pistons for me get a B plus. They only made 2 selections. So it was Asar Thompson at 5 and then Marcus Sasser at 25. I was impressed. That's a good draft. It is. The reason it's a B plus is because I think Osir Thompson is a little bit of an odd fit. Marcus Sasser, I think, is a great value at 25. I think I like that pick more than the Asar Thompson pick. Listen, like I said, I watched a lot of Houston Cougar basketball, and the value that Marcus Sasser had for that team when he wasn't on the floor, Houston was a different basketball team. They were not nearly as consistent on either end of the floor. Now, I understand he's 6'1". He's not a crazy athlete, but he is an absolute bulldog on the defensive end, and he can really, really shoot it from the perimeter. I just love the way that he plays the game. I think he's going to be a really nice bench guard for the Pistons, and I think he's going to play right away. He's a real solid player. Asar Thompson, he was my number 5 overall player. So talent is not the issue. Fit is a little weird because he's another guard that, I mean, you can play him at forward, but, he's still kind of coming into his own as a jump shooter. You saw it towards the end of last year with Overtime Elite. He kind of can get his own shot, but not really. He's primarily a defense, playmaking kind of guy, and he fits the mold of, a combo guard that can play both on and off ball. and Cade Cunningham and Jaden Ivey are firmly fit in those spots. So, Osar Thompson has the talent, and I love the Marcus Sasser pick, but it's a very interesting fit for the Pistons. That's what warrants giving them a B plus. Let's go to the Milwaukee Bucks. Like I said, I'm going by division. The Milwaukee Bucks, I gave them a B for their efforts last night. Both picks made in the second round. They took Andre Jackson at 36 out of UConn, and then they ended up taking Chris Livingston with the final pick in the draft at number 60. So you get your my 39 and 64 player. So correct value right at those respective spots. I'm not sure about the fits for either guy. Andre Jackson is, one of these guys that he does a little bit of everything. He's a superior athlete. The guy is just an insane jumper, lateral quickness, straight downhill speed. I mean, he's a ridiculous athlete, and he plays with an unreal amount of heart. You have to give the kid that. Kind of a poor jump shooter. I'm not sure he'll ever get there. So you kind of hope that he can carve out a role and develop a true skill that'll allow him to stick around in the NBA. Like I said, I really like him. 39 overall player. I love his athleticism. But he's an interesting player that doesn't have, a true skill that translates yet. So you're kind of gambling on his upside and his athleticism. And then Chris Livingston, who out of high school I loved. I thought Chris Livingston was going to burst on the scene at Kentucky, and I was wrong. He had a bad year at Kentucky. I'm actually surprised that he declared this year. He had gotten a draft promise. He stopped working out for teams early. There was an assumption that he had gotten a promise somewhere, and maybe it was from the Milwaukee Bucks. So, you just kind of wonder, what he does well. I mean, he gives you some scoring upside. Not a terrible shooter, can finish at the rim. He does a lot of things like that, but you just wonder, like I said, they took kind of two wing players that you're just kind of hoping they can carve out some sort of role in the NBA. Um, I think Livingston is more of a project than Andre Jackson is. Andre Jackson could maybe find some minutes next year as just like a spark athlete, good transition player kind of guy. Um, but that's really, I think, all you're going to get from both of these guys from Milwaukee. So I gave him a B. Not a bad performance for a team with two picks in the second round. All right, let's go to the Chicago Bulls. I wasn't expecting to need to evaluate their draft, but so far, not impressed. The Chicago Bulls get a C. So they had the forfeited pick at 57. Their one draft pick was Julian Phillips out of Tennessee. They took him at 35. They made that trade with Washington to get 35. And Julian Phillips right now, he was my 52nd overall player. He was number 52 on my board. He is not an offensive guy. This is not a guy that will provide you much offensively. Kind of a messy offensive player. It's not even really that he doesn't have a great skill set. It's more that he's a bad decision maker on the offensive side. He's not a smart offensive player. Um, this is one of these guys that, you hope he can get more efficient as a shooter and maybe make better decisions when attacking the basket, but he just really doesn't show that much upside as an offensive player. However, as a defensive guy, he's going to excel. He's a good defender. Good perimeter defender. He's got good size. He could probably guard inside and out. I'm sure he's not going to block a ton of shots, but he can get up and contest shots and guard guys on the perimeter. Like I said, reminds me a lot of Michael Kidd-Gilchrist, one of these, kind of forwards that can guard multiple positions. That's really his skill. That's the thing that's going to earn his living in the NBA, is if he can just remain a projectable defender, that's where he's going to make his living. So again, I'm not thrilled. I think it's a little bit of a reach. I think you could have gotten real value at 35, and I think Julian Phillips could have been had later in the draft. But again, I don't know that they needed to trade all the way up to 35 to go get this guy. Again, we don't know what front offices are thinking at certain points, but Julian Phillips, 52. I give the Chicago Bulls a C. All right, let's go to the Brooklyn Nets. We're almost done with the Eastern Conference. The Brooklyn Nets, for me, get a B plus. They did a good job. This is a relatively solid draft for them. They had the two back-to-back picks in the first round, taking Noah Clowney out of Alabama and then Dariq Whitehead at 21 and 22, and then they ended up with Jalen Wilson out of Kansas at 51. Um, so 26, 32, and 42. Pretty good. I mean, that's kind of what you want, right? The interesting part about Brooklyn is that I desperately thought that they needed guard help. They needed guys that could fill up their backcourt, shoot, play make. They needed guys like that. I actually thought that their front court was pretty good and solid with young players. And they pretty much went all front court. You know, Noah Clowney, I had him listed as a center. Again, number 26 player on my board. And he reminds me a lot of Christian Wood. You know, he's just one of these pick and roll bigs that has some stretch potential and can block shots. You know, I think, you know, he's going to be a rotational big for them. I think they could have gone in another area and gotten more value. I just do. I think they could have gotten more value at the guard position from that spot. Dariq Whitehead, I like that pick a little bit more. Gives him some more offensive upside. You can play him at the two guard as an off guard spot. I had him listed as a small forward. Listen, his athleticism took a big hit after all the injuries that he suffered, but he's got some offensive upside. He really proved at Duke last year that he could be a knockdown shooter. You know, I mean, people kind of questioned that early on, but he really proved that he could knock down shots at a pretty consistent rate last year. Um, so if his athleticism recovers and the further he gets away from those injuries, he starts getting a little bit of his spring back. I think that he could be a really solid player as well. Um, and then Jalen Wilson, he's one of these, you know, I said it last night. He's kind of a Spursian kind of player. Just does a lot of things, good passer, um, you know, solid, you know, stretch player. You know, reminds me a lot of Jordan Nwora. He runs the floor pretty well. You know, he's not a crazy athlete or anything, but he does a little bit of everything. And he had a great year at Kansas last year, averaged 20 points a game. So overall, pretty good. B plus for Brooklyn. Like I said, not the direction I would have gone in, but they did get good value. So I'll reward them for that. Brooklyn gets a B plus for me. Let's go to the Toronto Raptors. They're very easy because the Raptors made one pick, and it's the pick they should have made. Given how the board fell, Toronto Raptors get an A from me. One pick, number 13. They took my number 13 player, Grady Dick. Um, Great size, great athleticism, and he's a phenomenal shooter. That's what they needed, right? I expected Grady Dick to be gone by the time they were up. I expected them to need to take somebody like Keontae George, you know, somebody like Kobe Buffkin. But listen, Grady Dick fell. They seized the opportunity and they took him. Gives him a lot of versatility, kind of a combo wing player. Like I said, great size, great athleticism. He will struggle on the defensive side, at least early on in his career. He's a willing defender, but he's not a good one. So, you know, I think he's going to struggle a little bit. I didn't give you my comparison for him, but he reminds me a little bit of Reggie Miller. He's another one of these guys that, you know, I'm not sure he's going to have the same Hall of Fame career, but play style, grit, athleticism, shooting ability, it's very similar and very projectable for Grady Dick. He was widely regarded in the draft as the best shooter in the draft. So, great pick by Toronto. Not much else to say, really. I mean, he had a productive year last year, and I think he fits exactly what they wanted to do. He's a great fit for the Toronto Raptors. I mean, other than the horrendously ugly suit last night, you know, a good fit for Grady Dick and a great fit for the Toronto Raptors. All right, last pick here in the Eastern Conference as we move to the Boston Celtics. The Boston Celtics for me are going to get an A, and I know that seems a little weird for a team that had one pick and it was in the second round. Um, they took Jordan Walsh at 38 out of Arkansas. He was my number 44 player. I love the fit, but I also love the tactics in which the Celtics operated last night. They traded back, what, 3 or 4 times? I mean, I'm sure, accumulated some capital, alleviated some cap or something to move back and get a guy that I think fits what they want to do really, really well. Uh, Grant Williams, I think, is gone in free agency. They could bring him back, but just in case, they got a good insurance policy. This guy's a minutes eater. He's just a great, gritty player that gets dirty, fights for boards. He's aggressive under the rim. You wonder if he can shoot at a consistent rate, but just for a guy that can give you some energy off the bench. I just love his ability to, like I said, he reminds me of James Johnson, and James Johnson developed a bit of a jump shot later in his career. If Jordan Walsh can do that same thing, I think he could be a fan favorite in Boston. He just plays with a particular level of energy that is rare for certain players. So I really like it. So I give the Boston Celtics an A. Number 38, Jordan Walsh, good pick. All right, Philadelphia had nothing. They forfeited the 58th pick. They had nothing. The New York Knicks, they were the other team that didn't have any picks. So I got nothing on the Sixers, nothing on the New York Knicks. Uh, let's go to the West. And obviously, when we start in the West, we should start here for my first A plus of the evening. And that is, of course, the San Antonio Spurs. San Antonio crushed it. And it's not just because they took Wemby number 1 overall. I loved their second round pick also in CD Sissoko. Loved it. Loved it, loved it, loved it. Um, so they took my number 1 and number 27 player at pick number 1 and pick number 44. Loved it. I love the value that they got. Obviously, Victor Wembanyama is the best player in the draft. This will forever be known as the Wemby draft. Fully aware. And the kid just does everything, right? He's 7.5 feet tall, handles the ball like a guard. He plays great defense. Like I said, Kevin Durant and Rudy Gobert in one player. That's what he is. Okay. That's his upside on both ends of the floor. He hits jump 3-pointers off one leg. And, listen, like I said, I used the juggling reference yesterday. I know some people call me crazy for that, but the fact that he can juggle, I think, says a lot of and I literally mean that, literally juggling. You saw him throw out the first pitch at Yankee Stadium, and you saw the video of him juggling baseballs. I'm telling you, man, being able to juggle says a lot about you as a person, and even if it's not that big of a deal, and it's not a perfect projector or anything like that, but it's just one of those things, right? It's one of those moral things that you just look at and say, okay, what does it take to juggle? You have to fail and fail and fail and fail over and over and over again and not give up until you get it right. You have to practice and practice and practice until you get it right. So it says something about Wemby's work ethic. It says something about the kind of the person he is, and what kind of player he's going to be. That was one of my biggest selling points. Again, and it happened real late, but and I was, listen, he's the best prospect I ever evaluated, and he was before that. But just even more so, he just seems like the kind of kid that gets it. I have such faith that this kid is going to be an absolute superstar in this league. Um, so it doesn't surprise me at all. And then CD Sissoko, like I said, reminds me a lot of Evan Turner. He's very Spursian. Listen, I had him listed as a shooting guard. He's kind of a combo wing. I think you can play him in a lot of different ways. He's a great passer, good finisher, um, good ball handler for his size. He's got great athleticism. I think he fits exactly what the Spurs want to do, and it just gives them another player that fits into the mold of what the Spurs like. These guys that fit well into a system, they move the ball incredibly well. Great playmakers, right? It's just a good fit. So they took two French kids, right? Sidi Sissoko, he's G League player, but from France. So they took two French kids, and I love their draft. A+ draft for me with Wemby and Sidi Sissoko for the San Antonio Spurs. All right, we go to my next A+. Um, and as you can see, there aren't very many teams that failed in this draft. We're going to get into some bad grades shortly. Um, Another A+ draft for me, and this one's very obvious. The Houston Rockets absolutely murdered the draft yesterday. And they didn't even do anything. They didn't do anything nifty. They didn't nothing. They sat and waited and took the best player that they could both times. So two picks, both in the first round. They ended up with Amin Thompson at number 4 and Cam Whitmore at number 20. Home run draft. Home run. And I know everybody's worried about, we kind of now discovered today that the reason Cam Whitmore slid is for health concerns. There are injuries that people are not thrilled about, but they got my number 4 and number 9 players at 4 and 20. And not only did they do that, but they filled their needs perfectly. Just absolutely perfectly. Amen Thompson is the perfect player for them. And I said from the beginning, if they had taken Cam Whitmore at number 4, it would have been a mistake. It would have been. Amen Thompson was the player that they needed to take at number 4. Because like I said in the pre-draft show, in the mock draft show, Houston needed to accomplish two things. They needed to get better defensively desperately. They were unbelievably bad defensively last year. And they needed a guy that could play make and pass and distribute to all of those scorers that they already have, right? They're loaded with scoring. Jalen Green, Tari Eason, Jabari Smith, Alperen Şengün, Kevin Porter Jr., Josh Christopher. They're loaded with scores. They have a ton. And now they have Cam Whitmore. They have another legit scorer, and Amin Thompson is going to be their primary guard with great size. He's one of the best defenders in the draft. He's one of the best athletes in the draft, if not the best athlete in the draft. A great passer, great ball handler. I mean, he's just a great player. Like I said, he reminds me a lot of Ben Simmons. The only issue with him is that he's not a great jump shooter. And you just hope that at some point he can become at least a little bit more of a reliable jump shooter. Get him up to 31%. Get him up. He shot 23% at overtime elite. Get him up to 31%. Make it so that you got him, guard him at least a little bit out there. So just make sure you get that done. But Cam Whitmore, like I said, crazy slide, an unprecedented slide, but a great, great pick. Such a great athlete and scorer. Like I said, I was a little bit more skeptical on him because he didn't prove to me that he could be a reliable shooter. And again, if this is a guy whose, decision making is not perfect, you just don't want him chucking up shots at the rim, but he's got great burst, great explosiveness. He can really get to the rim and finish. And he gives you some defense too. I mean, listen, he's got some two-way ability. I liked Cam Whitmore as a prospect. I know some people had him top 4, top 5. I didn't have him that high, but still a great prospect with great upside. Houston crushed this draft with Amen Thompson and Cam Whitmore. Okay. The Dallas Mavericks, they had a very interesting night. Both their picks last night came off trades. And for me, not impressed. Dallas Mavericks get a C for me. Um, so they had 10. They traded back to get 12. And the price for that was they get rid of the Davis Bertans contract. Great. Okay. So they got number 12 and they made a trade with Sacramento to get 24. So at 12, they took Derek Lively, and at 24, they took Olivier Maxence Prosper. My number 24 and 55 overall player with their 2 first-round picks. I'm not impressed. I'm not impressed. And listen, they needed to solve a problem with Derek Lively, right? Now they finally have a center that can block shots, give them some real interior presence. That pick I don't hate. And I actually think he could be a pretty good playmaker. He's got some offensive upside. If you can start getting him to shoot outside, because there's a lot of people that think that he can eventually shoot threes. If he can get out and shoot threes and give you some driving to the basket and some touch around the rim and a little post game and stuff like that, could be a really, really good player. But he's raw, and I don't think he's ready yet. So, I'm a little. I think. Listen, I don't know. It might not be fair because I mocked him to 12 to OKC a bunch prior to the draft. Um, but even then, I still thought it's a little bit of a reach. It's a little bit much for me. So Derek Lively is not really the pick that I have too much of a problem with. Olivier Maxence Prosper, I think was, and I apologize in advance. Olivier Maxence Prosper going in, I expected to be the most overrated player in the draft. I understand why people like him. He crushed the pre-draft process. He's a pretty good athlete, got a big body, gives you some defensive versatility. I understand. I don't see listen, he's kind of like Andre Jackson in a way, similar. He's one of those guys that doesn't have a skill that translates right now. Big time developmental prospect. I'm just not that into him. People say, "Oh, but listen, he kind of does a little bit of everything." When I watched him, it almost looked like he did a little bit of nothing. He's not a great shooter. He's not a great finisher at the rim. He's a good defender. But listen, for a guy that's 6'8", 6'9", great athleticism, he should be able to defend a little bit better at the rim, and he should be a better rebounder. He'll average less than 5 rebounds a game at Marquette last year. Just, I mean, I want to believe in him. I do, because I'm sure he's a wonderful kid. But I didn't see it. I didn't see it. Whoever took Olivier Maxence Prosper in the first round was going to get a bogged down in their grade. I mean, I just don't like the value. I don't know. And maybe I'm missing something. Maybe I'm watching this kid and you're going to be like, listen, Guido, you are missing completely on Olivier Maxence Prosper. You're just missing. Maybe that's true, but I can't get behind it. I'm just not a fan. Like I said, I would have loved to see Dallas try to add some more shooting around Luka, tap into this really wide and deep wing draft. But instead they took, listen, I don't mind the center pick. I don't mind Lively. Olivier Maxence Prosper is a big time reach for me, and it doesn't really solve an issue. He adds to the rotation, and I'm not sure what he gives you right out of the gate. You can develop a skill, that's great. I just don't see it right now. So a C right now for the Dallas Mavericks. All right, let's get back to a good grade. The New Orleans Pelicans, uh, they're another one of these teams that made one pick, and it's the pick they should have made. So they get an A. 14th pick, they took Jordan Hawkins out of UConn. He was my number 11 player on my board, and I like it a lot. I think it's exactly the direction they should have gone in. It's the exact player they should have taken. I think he plays with the right mindset. I think he's going to fit really nicely there. He's just a great, great shooter. Great shooter, great shot maker. I think he's going to be able to eventually create his own shot. I know that there are some people who think that he's just going to be a standstill shooter, guy that can hit shots off screens. But I think he's going to eventually, excuse me. I think he's going to eventually be able to create his own shot. I think that talent is real. Again, reminds me a lot of Buddy Hield. Wouldn't surprise me if he develops to a point where he could average close to 20 points a game. I just love his ability to shoot. Not a bad ball handler. I think he's going to walk into the NBA day one and shoot. And then if you can get him to become a little bit more of an offensive weapon later on, I think that's a big win. So, like I said, great pick by the Pelicans. I think it's you know one of the better fits in the draft. It just seems pretty natural. So New Orleans gets an A for last night. All right. One of the worst grades in the draft last night. A C minus. And yes, I'm a little biased. A C minus goes to the Memphis Grizzlies. Um, and it could be even lower. Um, so they actually got good value with their first pick. They ended up taking G.G. Jackson at 45. He was my number 18 overall player. He's another one of those guys that I was a little higher on because I love his offensive upside and his athleticism, despite him having a bad year at South Carolina and despite there being some immaturity issues with him. Um, I loved that value. They ended up taking Tariq Baburovic, who, again, a Bosnian wing who I did not have ranked, and they killed my 58 for 58. So I'm a little angry at the Memphis Grizzlies right now because he was an unranked player. They took him at 56. And, listen, there are some times where, and I watched the kid afterward. He seems to have a pretty smooth jump shot. It looks like he's got some offensive upside as a perimeter shooter. Um, but he came off the bench for his team in Turkey last year, and he averaged like 4 points a game, and he shot 28% from three and 37% from the field or something like that. And I'm thinking to myself, what are we doing? What are we doing? And the guy could be a good player, but if we're being honest, if you wanted to go draft and stash, there were plenty of guys that were available that you could have taken. I mean, listen, the best international player that was left on my board was one of my favorite players in the draft, one of my diamond in the rough guys. It was the French guard Nadir Heafy. I mean, you want to talk a guy that's a spark plug. He's undersized, but he runs the floor like a deer. I mean, he's like Russ Smith. If you remember Russ Dickulus, he's one of those guys, creates his own shot, shoots really well. Just one of these energy guys, one of these little energy guards, 6'3", just a nice player. You wanted to go draft and stash, somebody like Nadir Heafy. If you wanted to even go even deeper on the board, got somebody like Vincent Valerio Bodone, right? That would have worked. He's kind of a similar guy. Vincent Valerio Bodone, kind of an outside shooter, gives you a little bit of offensive upside. Somebody like the Greek Nikos Rokavopoulos, right? I mean, you had guys that, put up legit stat lines, played legit minutes overseas, and have proven skill sets. I mean, we like the way that Baburovic's jump shot looks, but he got no results. 28% on barely any minutes. The guy averaged 4 points a game. So, excuse me that I'm a little bit miffed at the idea that Memphis overthought it. I think they did. I mean, there was plenty of talent on the board. Plenty of talent on the board. And I understand that, it's 56. It's the third to last pick in the draft. It shouldn't matter that much. But this was a pretty deep draft. I mean, you had guys. I mean, you didn't have to go draft and stash either. I just think that you're a team like Memphis. You need guys that can contribute. You need to milk every ounce of ability and contribution that you can get out of every asset you have, every draft pick you have. And the other thing that bothers me about Memphis, I mean, G.G. Jackson now becomes, I'm not kidding, the sixth power forward on their roster. 6. Jaren Jackson, Brandon Clark, Santi Aldama, Jake LaRavia, David Roddy. What's common between all 5 of those players? They were all first round picks. All 5 of those guys were first round picks. What are we doing here? I understand taking talent over need, but this is ridiculous. So, if it were me, and like I said, G.G. Jackson is good value. Now, my number 18 player reminds me a lot of Josh Smith, but he's a power forward, and that's the only position he'll be able to play. So, again, I'm a little off on the Memphis Grizzlies. C minus at best. And the only reason they're getting a C minus is because they got my number 18 player at number 45. That's it. They got good value at that pick. I don't understand what they do. I don't understand it. You need wing guys. This is a deep wing draft. And I checked. They haven't signed a single undrafted free agent. Not one guy. I don't get it. I don't get it. C minus for the Memphis Grizzlies. All right, let's go to the Los Angeles Lakers. Lakers get an A. Lakers had a good draft. They got my number 17 and 16 players at number 17 and 40. Jalen Hood-Schifino out of Indiana. He was one of the better point guards in the draft. A really gifted passer. He's one of those guys that can truly allow LeBron and some of these other guys to play more off ball. This is a good pick. And I know a lot of people are very about the fit. I get it. But this is a great, great player and a good fit for them. Gives them some solid mid-range. He's 6'6", good ball handler, gives you some defense. You just his big thing is that he's not a consistent three-point shooter, but if he can take some of the pressure as a ball handler off some of these guys like LeBron and whoever else, I mean, that's going to make all the difference in the world. And then at 40, they took one of my favorite players in the entire draft, Maxwell Lewis out of Pepperdine. Maxwell Lewis, I think, is a stud in the making. He is something else. Just a big time scorer. The only issue that I had with the Maxwell Lewis pick, and this is the only reason they didn't get an A+. The only reason I'm a little hesitant to give them an A+ on this is because Maxwell Lewis is a project. This is not a kid that's going to step in tomorrow and average the points that they need right out of the gate. And I'm going to put this up here, and then I'm going to put the grade back up. All Even Podcast, Lewis is a beast. He absolutely is. He was one of my favorite players in the whole draft. Favorite players. Super athlete, great length, and this kid can flat out score the basketball. Just flat out score it. Like I said, number 16 overall player was Maxwell Lewis. Barry Grant says he's a plus defender already. He does give you some defensive upside. Listen, I don't know that he's as ready on the defensive side as people think he is. I just think right now that his offensive game is a little behind. It's just because he's not the best decision maker. He's a little turnover prone. He's a little bit of a project. So again, great draft by the Lakers. I think they needed somebody a little bit more pro ready, but what he did at Pepperdine was impressive, and the amount of skill that he showed and athleticism and all of that good stuff. I love what the Lakers did. Jalen Hood-Schifino, I think, is a great, great fit. I do. And I know people think it's odd because they needed shooting. I get that they needed shooting. But Jalen Hood-Schifino tackles a different problem. And this is a player that's mature, and he's going to work well in a system, and he's going to do whatever you need him to do. If you can get that kid to shoot, he's going to be a real problem too. Lakers get an A for me. All right. This will make my buddy Barry Grant Jr. happy since I know he's watching right now. Let's talk about the Clippers. Clippers get a C minus. Not a fan of what the Clippers did. I'm not a fan. Now, listen, I, I like Kobe Brown. Kobe Brown was my number 40 player. So they had number 30 and number 48 as far as picks, and they picked my number 40 and 67 player. Um, Kobe Brown is a good scorer. Good scorer. More of a combo forward. I think he's more of a 4 than a 3. Reminds me a little bit of PJ Washington, can finish at the rim, kind of progressed as a shooter last year. Um, I think he's going to be a pretty solid bench scorer as kind of a Jeff Greenish kind of player. Um, but the reality is that his upside is not very high. He's 23 years old. He was one of the oldest players in the draft. Not a huge fan. Not a huge fan. Um, and then Jordan Miller, I mean, maybe I was missing something on Jordan Miller. He was number 67 on my board. He's got a long way to go. Listen, he struggles as a shooter. I think he gives you some defensive upside and some finishing upside. But as of right now, I don't know that Jordan Miller's a contributor. And again, the Clippers, with both of their picks, took two of the older players in the draft. They did. Jordan Miller, I believe, is 23 also, or 22 turning 23. So Kobe Brown, Jordan Miller, not a fan of what they did. Not a fan. Not a ton of upside. I know that they're going to try and, give these guys roles, but I think Jordan Miller right now is not reliable offensively. And Kobe Brown, I like him, but I think you could have gotten him later. So that's just me. Kobe Brown, Jordan Miller, Clippers get a C minus. Um, Really making me think I should have given the Grizzlies a lower grade because I think the Clippers did have a bit of a better draft than Memphis did. Um, okay, Golden State. And this is for my buddy Bryson Carver. Um, Listen, I'm going to give them an A minus because Golden State, I think, reached a little bit at 19. They had 19 and 59, right? Second to last pick in the draft. So they took Brandon Pojemski at 19. He was my number 38 player. And then at 59, second to last pick in the draft, they took Trace Jackson Davis, who was my number 36 player. So the guy they took in the second round, I had ranked over the guy they took in the first. So Pojemski's interesting because he's a very warrior-esque player. One of these guys that can just shoot and shoot and shoot and shoot and shoot. This guy shoots the basketball at a high level. Transfer from Illinois. Listen, they told him, Illinois, dude, you are not good enough to play here. So he goes to Santa Clara and torches everybody in Santa Clara. Averaged 20 points a game, left-handed stroke. Listen, he's not a super athlete, and he's not a great defender. But listen, he's got makings of being able to create his own shot. He's a solid ball handler. He can really shoot. Listen, he's a very warrior-esque player. I think he's going to come off the bench right out of the gate and play. He reminds me a lot of Luke Kennard, one of these just shot-making kids. So Pojemski's a great player. And then you look at Trace Jackson Davis. I had him ranked as a center, but he's got a really nice offensive game. Really nice offensive game. Put up a mean stat line at Indiana. Double-double machine, big-time big man. And listen, he reminds me a lot of Elton Brand. He'll be one of these guys that's just so experienced, and he'll be a contributor right out of the gate. I think he gets some pretty serious minutes right away in Golden State. So great job by them. A minus for me. Pojemski's a tiny bit of a reach, but again, he fits the mold really well for them. And Trace Jackson Davis is phenomenal value at the end of the draft. Phenomenal, phenomenal value. So great job by the Golden State Warriors. The Sacramento Kings. So Sacramento had a kind of an interesting draft, right? But I am going to give them a B plus because I think they did a good job trading back and still getting some good value. And they took guys pretty much right in the slot that I thought that they would go, right? So they had the 34 and 54 pick by the end of the night. They ended up taking Colby Jones and Jalen Slauson, who I was really high on. Colby Jones was my number 33 player. They took him at 34. Jalen Slauson was my number 56 player, and they took him at 54. So a great job. Great job overall. Colby Jones was, I always say this, there's always a Josh Hart in every draft, right? There's a Josh Hart in every draft. Similar play style, grit, all that stuff. Colby Jones is the Josh Hart of this draft. So I love his upside as a shooter. I think he can really score. He can get inside and play defense. And I think he's ready to play. I think Colby Jones walks into Sacramento and has an immediate role as just kind of one of these bench wing players that can provide you a little bit of two-way ability. So a great job by the Kings in picking him up in the second round. And Jalen Slauson, you want to talk about a guy that actually does everything? This guy actually does everything. I compared him to Scotty Barnes. I don't know that he's as good as Scotty Barnes is, but he's got a very similar play style. This is a Furman kid. So Jalen Slauson really kind of led that team to what was a pretty decent tourney run. So, you want to talk about a guy that shoots a little bit, can finish, plays defense, playmaking, just not crazy upside. I love what Jalen Slauson does. He's kind of a combo forward. Listen, Kings did a great job. So B plus for me for the Kings. Um, the way they come away with 33 and 56. All right, final team in the division, and we're almost done here, folks. We're almost done. C minus for the Phoenix Suns. Short draft for them. Had number 52, and they took Dayton's Tumani Kamara, who was my number 75 player. So he was the guy who was furthest down on the board that was taken in the draft. Everybody that was taken in the draft last night was within my top 75, except for Tarek Baburovic. So C minus for the Suns. I was down on Tumani Kamara. He reminds me a little bit of Carl Landry. Gives you some offensive upside, but I just don't know that he's a contributor at the NBA level at this point. He doesn't have a refined enough skill set to be a real contributor. I think at that point for Phoenix, you could have gotten real value, and I don't think Tumani Kamara does that. You needed a guy that could contribute next year. This was an opportunity for the Suns to take a player that has a skill set that can help them win a championship next year, right? They just traded for Bradley Beal. They traded for Kevin Durant last year. This is a roster that is ready to win. Tumani Kamara gets you no closer. And I understand it's late in the draft. It's 52nd pick. I get all that. And it's hard to find contributors that late. But you could have. You could have found somebody that could shoot, somebody that could rebound, somebody that could do something. Tumani Kamara is a long way away, I think, from contributing. He's going to be he's another one of these guys where he's a decent athlete and not a bad offensive player, but you're just hoping his skill develops to where he can become a contributor. I don't think that happens by the middle of next year. So C minus for me for the Phoenix Suns. All right, last division. Excuse me. Portland Trailblazers. They crushed the draft last night. Give the Portland Trailblazers an A plus. Big time A plus. So 3 draft picks, number 3, number 23, and number 43. They took Scoot Henderson at 3, Chris Murray at 23, and Ryan Rupert at 43. Number 3, number 30, and number 15. Great job. Great job. Scoot Henderson was the obvious pick there, right? Among the top 3, he was who's left. I think pairing him up with Shaedon Sharpe gives you one of the best backcourts, one of the best young backcourts in the league. It opens up questions of what you're going to do with Damian Lillard. I know that there's a bunch of talks about that. I think if you want to maximize Scoot Henderson's potential, you throw him into the fire right away. You find a trade partner for Damian Lillard, and you just start over and rebuild. So Scoot Henderson, great value number 3. Obviously, my number 3 overall player reminds me a lot of Derrick Rose. Excuse me, great athlete. I think he's going to turn into a decent shooter. Just needs to prove it to me. Good playmaker, plays with a ton of grit. I just a great overall player, Scoot Henderson. Chris Murray is one of those players that I said it last night. He doesn't have a true weakness. He doesn't have a true strength. Just kind of does a little bit of everything. Very similar to his brother Keegan in Sacramento. Not as much upside, not as good of an athlete, but can shoot it a little, can finish a little, can play make a little, can play some defense a little, just does a little bit of everything, and he's ready to play. I think that Portland is going to find some minutes for him right out of the gate as kind of a combo forward. I think that's a great pick for them at 23. And then 43, they just got some sensational value with Ryan Rupert. Ryan Rupert right out of the gate is going to be a top tier defender. He is a phenomenal defender on the perimeter. Great size, 6'6", 6'7", great length. I love his offensive upside. I think he's going to be able to score at the next level. He was one of the better two-way players in the draft for me. He reminds me a lot of Andre Iguodala. If he can really start shooting, then he's going to show people that he can really, really make it happen on both ends of the floor. So just great overall value by Portland. Listen, number 3, number 30, and number 15 players on my board with Scoot Henderson, Chris Murray, and Ryan Rupert. Just a great overall draft by Portland. And then we get another A+. We get one more A+. This is my last one. One more A+ in the draft. And it goes to the Utah Jazz. Utah did a great job. Taylor Hendricks at number 9, Keontae George at 16, and Bryce Sensabaugh at 18 at 28. That's legit. That's my number 8, number 14, and 29 overall players. Listen, Taylor Hendricks is a good fit for them. One of those two-way power forwards that just does a little bit of everything. Springy athlete, good shooter. I think he's got some shot creation upside. He doesn't do it yet, but I think he's going to get there. Just a real good athlete that can rebound and score, gives you a lot of two-way ability. Love that fit. And then they just hammered offense. Keontae George out of Baylor is an absolute bucket. The dude is just a bucket, right? He will shoot. He'll create his own shot. He'll get to the rim. He'll hit shots off the dribble. He's just an absolute flat-out scorer. Love the fit. He'll play right away and score. And then Bryce Sensabaugh, I think, is going to find a role for himself, too. One of the better pure shooters in the draft. Gives you some two-way ability. Reminds me a lot of TJ Warren. Just a super stud. Seriously, he just can really shoot it. Shot over 40% from 3. He likes to use his body and post people up and gain leverage for himself. Big physical player. So a great job by Utah. Great value. Number 9, number 16, number 28 picks. They took 8, 14, and 29 on my board with Hendricks, George, and Sensabaugh. Great job by the Utah Jazz. All right, 3 more teams. Let's go to the Denver Nuggets, the defending champs. Defending champs right now, they are getting a B-. 3 picks. They started out with 1. They now have 3. Number 29, 32, and 37 is where they ended up picking. They ended up taking Julian Strawther, Jalen Pickett, and Hunter Tyson. So Julian Strawther was the 35th player on my board. Pickett was 69. Hunter Tyson was 63. So I actually liked their pick in the first because I think Julian Strawther gives you some real legit knockdown shooting and some two-way ability with his Torrey. I gave him a Torrey Craig comparison. A long, wiry athlete that can really, really shoot. He's a phenomenal catch and shoot player. He'll thrive off screens. He's going to be a real big time shooter, and I think he's going to contribute right away. The other two picks had me a little iffy, especially Jalen Pickett. Jalen Pickett at 32, I think, was a big time reach. Um, he's got a very odd game. He was one of the harder players to scout because um, he's kind of a big man, but a guard. It's very weird. He's kind of one of those guys that rebounds and passes pretty well and makes his living in the low post, but he's like 6'4" and 6'5". Like that's what he is. He's a very odd guard. Um, but he does have a unique skill set. Um, could find some success. Jalen Pickett, Penn State, reminds me a little bit of the old Michael Ray Richardson. But again, you're just kind of hoping that at some point, he can migrate out to the perimeter and develop a little bit of a jump shot and some perimeter game. And then Hunter Tyson, I actually didn't hate this pick. Um, Good shooter. He's got great size, did well in the pre-draft process. I think he's going to project as a really solid shooter at the next level. Um, he's got a little bit of Dean Wade in him. Dean Wade, Kyle Singler, like one of these kind of perimeter shooters that with good size, 6'9", kind of a combo forward. You can play him in a lot of ways. Plays with a lot of heart. So not a bad player. So a couple reaches, I think, in the second round with their two early second round picks, but I think good value and a good selection there in the first round. So Denver gets a B- for me. Not a terrible draft. And then we get last two teams. The Oklahoma City Thunder get an A- from me. I liked both of their selections. Got to be honest. Liked them both. Um, Traded up with Dallas, took on the Davis Bertans contract, but that's okay. Uh, Number 10 overall player at number 10, they took Cason Wallace out of Kentucky. Really, really liked him. And then with the 50th pick, they took my 45th ranked player in Kansas State's Keontae Johnson. Really like what they did. Cason Wallace, I think, is a 10, 12-year starter as a point guard in this league. He's just a good player. And I think they made another move that alleviates a little bit of the pressure off of Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. And that's a legit thing. Cason Wallace is great with his perimeter defense. Good, just good all around defender and outrageously high IQ. He just understands the game of basketball. This guy just knows where to be and when, how to read defenses, good passer. Like he just does a lot of the little things right. Just one of those guys you can root for. He was a top 10 player for me. He was my number 10 overall player. Reminds me a lot of Drew Holiday. And listen, if he can develop into a consistent perimeter shooter, then I think you got a really good player on your hands. And, maybe not a perennial all-star every year, but a 10, 12-year NBA starter as a point guard. Really, really great pick there by OKC. And then Keontae Johnson's just a good athlete. Good athlete. He's kind of a forward. He's one of these kind of swing forwards that can do a lot of different things. Reminds me a lot of Lamar Stevens. He's 6'5", but he's a great lob threat. One of these guys that gets up and gets boards. He can score a little bit. There was worry with him because of the heart condition that he suffered with in Florida. But now he went on to Kansas State, had a nice year, kind of proved that he can still play. He's no longer a first-round pick, but a real solid value here in the second round. So a good job by OKC. They get an A- for their draft. And then finally, last team that we can write in, and they're going to get an A- too. And that is the Minnesota Timberwolves. Uh, 33 and 53 were their draft picks. They ended up taking Leonard Miller, the G League's Leonard Miller, and then UCLA's Jalen Clark, which Listen, that warrants them an A-minus grade. Leonard Miller was my number 25 overall player. Jalen Clark was number 57. They had a good draft. I mean, Leonard Miller, I think, was one of my favorite players in the whole draft, man. I mean, one of the guys that, he declared last year, withdrew, came back this year, and improved his stock. I thought he was going to go in the first round. He goes very early second, but still, he was just such a good overall player. Great year with the G League last year, 18 points a game, 11 rebounds, 6'10", left-handed, gives you some versatility on the defensive side. And again, another one of these good finishers, good rebounders, does a lot of these, he's kind of a combo forward, plays more of the 4 than the 3, but kind of a combo forward. If he can stretch the floor consistently, Leonard Miller has a long career in the NBA. Long, long, long career. So loved that pick from Minnesota. And then Jalen Clark, I mean, he's a dog of a defender. This dude knows how to defend. Straight up. Andre Roberson, I don't think he's going to be an offensive threat at all, but he's a dog defender. Great athlete, can really pick your pocket. I mean, he's just an unbelievable player who creates turnovers on the defensive side. So loved what they did. A- for Minnesota. That took my number 25 and 57 players. And they solved some issues. They needed some more perimeter defense. They needed a power forward that can play consistently. Uh, so I love what they did. Leonard Miller, Jalen Clark gives the T-Wolves an A-. All righty. So that does it. So big winners of the draft for me. A few A pluses. Utah, Portland get an A plus. Houston and San Antonio get an A plus. A few A's. Toronto gets an A. Boston gets an A. Cleveland gets an A. Anybody else with an A? The Pelicans get an A. The Lakers get an A. So overall, a bunch of teams really did well. Some of the bigger losers of the draft for me, I think, honestly, I should have given them a lower grade. The biggest loser of the draft for me is the Memphis Grizzlies. The Memphis Grizzlies really, I did not think did well. Um, they got good value with G.G. Jackson, but the Bobrovich pick, I mean, of course, it has me miffed, but I don't think it serves them well. Positionally and just for contributors, I just don't think that Memphis did well. The Clippers did not do well. Phoenix, I think, should have done more. Not a fan really of what Dallas did or Chicago. Um, but overall, most teams did well. Brooklyn did well. So that's it, guys. Draft season's over. You won't be hearing much draft stuff from me from now until next year. But it was an absolute pleasure. Like I said, if you haven't had a chance to check out the draft guide, it's not too late. Go ahead and check it out on the Grid website. Again, if you want some more specific information on the players that your team drafted, feel absolutely free to not only check out the draft guide, but reach out to me and ask me questions directly. Debate with me if you want. If you disagree, if you think I'm crazy for having Amani Bates so high, then go ahead and tell me why I'm crazy. I welcome it. So that does it for me. I'm Mike Guido, co-founder of the Grid. Um, listen, this is always incredibly fun for me, and I just want to thank everybody that at the network that allows me to do this. Barry Grant Jr., the head honcho here at the Grid, he's a phenomenal leader. Really kind of facilitated the draft show from behind the scenes. Always a huge part of it. We missed him this year for the draft show last year. Bryson Carver, who always puts up with me and hosts the draft show, much to his chagrin, and everybody else at the Grid that just does great work every single day providing content. But as for me, this is Mike Guido, the end of the NBA draft grades and end of NBA draft season. We'll see you.